Firstly, I'm going to introduce Julie Richardson from the Chancery Trust, who's joining the panel. Thank you very much, Julie, for your time and your input. It's been magnificent. And I think there'll be lots of schools and people that want to talk to yourself around your journey, which we'll come on to later. So thank you very much, Julie, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mark.
And we've got obviously Jeff Marshall, who is Chair of Governors for Kerry's School. And also, I keep saying, Jeff, an academy and an education expert. I hope you don't mind me introducing you like that. Lots of you would know Jeff Marshall and his company. And we've got Kerry Hart, who's out on vacation with students today.
Vacation, Mark. Come on, I am doing a bit of work.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. So this is Coffee Club 4. We started these in January when we were talking about this is obviously before the white paper, when we were talking about the state of the school system and the loads of 2,000 single academy trusts and empty mats. Now we have the white paper. We're moving on to more firmer ground, which is around what do we do next. And this subject, due diligence, which is today's subject, is a huge subject, and we've got hopefully some really important information to share. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, and we're going to talk through the agenda today. So here's the panel. We've got the challenge, which the white paper is now highlighted in terms of the number of schools that have got left to convert to academy, and then the numbers are quite staggering, and we'll run through that.
Oh,
and then,
the slides have disappeared for me. Sorry to interrupt there.
I do apologise. Must be something. Right, here we'll try again. Can you see that?
Yeah, they come back again now. Yeah, thank you.
Right, that's great. Thank you for pointing that out, sir. We're going to talk about internal and external due diligence, and then we're going to delve into Julie's journey, because I think that's the most fascinating aspect of my conversations in the last couple of months about due diligence. Wanted to talk to someone who's been there and done that, and I want to share that with you guys because it's a fascinating experience from maintained to single to multi-academy, and Julie's actually doing the job. And then we'll answer some questions, guys. Firstly, I looked up I took the liberty of understanding what due diligence meant as an actual term, and I've come up with 3 terms, which when you're talking about education and academies and schools, the top 2 really are quite scary. But then you look at the 3rd explanation, and it really does highlight due diligence. And we've talked about in previous sessions and meetings with the panel, really, it's an awful lot of work you've got to do, especially if you're looking at a 10 school mat in 2028. It can take you, it's a full-time job for people. The last slide before we break to conversations is just about the challenge. So these are the number of schools that have converted over since 2009, and you've got blue and orange around the sponsors and sponsored, and the number of schools. So if you can see in 2016-17 that we topped out at 937 schools converting to academy. Slowed down during COVID for obvious reasons, but then the white paper has now delivered the challenge, and it is a huge challenge. So that means we will be in unprecedented territory, not just 1, 2, 3 or 4 years, but for the next 9 years. And it just highlights that since academies have existed, we've never got near these numbers. So the challenge is on, and the moral obligation, if you like, has been shifted to the schools themselves. And where you start on your journey is all important, and what your research and your own work that you're doing at the moment is going to be around, okay, how do we get there? What do we want to look like? And we're here to just sort of discuss that and help you with our experiences. So it's a big challenge. And due diligence, the business term that's being lent to academies and schools and education now, is something we're going to discuss and try and explore today, because it's huge. It means de-risking your journey. So I have a question for Jeff. Due diligence, Jeff. Why should you start this now? What should you be looking at?
Mark, I think that people get hung up on the fact that due diligence is an activity. For me, it's actually an ongoing activity that actually doesn't have a start date and an end date. Due diligence goes on every time you have a conversation with somebody. And you can never do enough due diligence. I've spoken to head teachers who in a cluster have created a 5-school mat and said due diligence will take them an afternoon because they know each other. Now, that might be that those 5 people know each other, but actually the wider components of a school and an organisation and trying to create a 6th entity, because there are 6 entities in a 5-school mat. There's the trust that sits above the 5 trading styles. And each of those schools has its own journey and its own story to tell. And you can never do enough due diligence to get to that stage of making a decision. And due diligence should be split into different things. It should be split into soft and hard due diligence. It should also be split into doing due diligence to see if you wish to go on the journey. And then it's got to actually evolve into due diligence in the journey, to actually do hard due diligence to find out everything there is about those schools that you're going with or that trust that you're joining. Because ultimately, at the end of all of that, you then still have a decision to make whether or not to join that trust or create that trust with other schools. And due diligence even then continues after that. It's called the onboarding process. And Julie will talk about that, or what the onboarding process looks like. But it is still due diligence back. So, due diligence isn't a set activity that you can fit into a template that can be done over an afternoon. There are many, many aspects of it, Mark, that takes months, if not years, to ensure that you have a successful mat at the end of it.
When we talk about de-risking this process, Jeff, and some head teachers thinking they could do it in an afternoon, and we've had conversations where it can take, and it's ongoing, it can take 6 months to do due diligence on one school. How are we going to get to 1,027 schools becoming academies for 9 years in a row if no jobs are being created to do this role in itself?
Mark, and we won't get there. Even the DfE admit there's probably going to be slippage because of this word capacity. Now, capacity has been a buzzword in and around the education sector for a few years. It has been around the academy sector for many years. What capacity does the trust have? We always talk about the capacity that a trust has, but none of us are talking about the capacity that the DfE has with the number of DfE leads. A DfE lead is a named person who actually operates on behalf of the DfE in a conversion or a transfer or a merger. We then need to talk about the capacity of the local authority. Local authorities in austerity measures have lost an awful lot of people who've set up from their box rooms consultancy companies. And a lot of local authorities have locum part-time lawyers. How on earth will a local authority end up with 25 conversions where they've got 25 commercial transfer agreements, 25 leases to do that when I'm talking to a number of local authorities in the work that I do? I've got one local authority at the moment who says they can do 1 conversion at a time because they don't have capacity. So how do we build? We can talk about capacity that we can build into our trusts and our schools, and we do that really well. But we can't control the capacity building at the DfE and the local authority because they're still party to this conversion, to this transfer, to this merger. And if they don't have the capacity, we will never get to that over 1,000 conversions over the next 9 years, 8-9 years. We won't get there. So there will be slippage. The big question here, Mark, is where is that slippage going to happen biggest? Is it the authority? Is it the DfE? It won't be the schools and the trusts. It'll be somewhere else that we can't control. And what happens then is if you've got an area of the country that has massive slippage, then we end up with a postcode lottery. And if your school's in that, or if your SAT's in that, or if your empty mat is in that area, then you're banking a problem that you can't actually mitigate against.
Absolutely. And we've talked about what we can do correctly and thoroughly, and set our own house in order before we start our journeys. And we'll come on to Kerry's what Kerry's already doing. But Julie, if I may, could I just ask you, from your journey from the maintain world to the empty mat and then into Chancery, the first question I got for you is, what did you know what you didn't want to do and what kind of mat you didn't want to join, and then therefore did you already filter your options as a school and as a trust?
Yes, definitely. Well, so in 2014 we were a maintained school. We needed another classroom, and we were told by the local authority that although we had the money, we couldn't build a new classroom. We'd have to use our library that had actually no windows in it at all. So this prompted our governors to look into academisation at that time. It was easy to convert then we converted into a multi-academy trust, but we were actually the only school within that trust. Then in 2015, we converted, built a classroom, realised the freedom we had as an academy to go to any supplier, access condition improvement funding through the government, and generally run the school and the curriculum as we wanted to, putting the children first. Everything was going really well. Then we received a letter from the DFE in early 2018 to say we could no longer stay on our own. There was no valid reason for this because other single multi-academy trusts within the area were not being pushed. So we were told that we've got to find another trust to join, or we would be sent on a speed dating for schools, as we called it, or the DFE would place us in a trust of their choice. So we started doing our homework in May 2018, and we set up a team to look at trusts, which consisted of the head teacher, the deputy head, the chair and vice chair of governors, and myself. So we looked at 8 trust websites initially that were in our area. And from the information, we quickly narrowed this down to 3. That was because one trust was increasing the salary of the CEO tremendously each year. As soon as a new school come on, the CEO got a pay rise. Others were more like a takeover, which would mean we'd lose control of the budget, invoicing, my job would have gone. So we narrowed it down to 3 trusts, all which were of different sizes. We came across Chancery in our search, which had not long been set up. It consisted of 2 like-minded schools, and their vision and values were the same as ours. And the more conversations we had, it was clear that there were things that we could add to the trust, as well as the trust could give to us. So it actually felt more like a merger of like-minded people who could make a real difference to the children rather than a takeover. So we joined Chancery in December 2019 after conducting due diligence on them, and Chancery conducted due diligence on us. And this wasn't rushed, and it took about a year, as we all wanted to make sure that we were making the right decision for all of us. Because it's not whether you like the trust, it's whether the trust also likes you as a school. So our staff met with staff from the trust, our governors met with directors and other governors from the trust, and we started working together as a partnership before we legally joined. And that also helped us to know that we'd made the right decision. Some big questions were like, we looked at the scheme of delegation, what sort of control did we still have, what decisions could we still make, what were the trust non-negotiables? That is a biggie, because of obviously once you've joined, you've got to stick to them. We talked and we visited other schools within, the other schools within the trust as well. I would recommend people do that. You don't just, sort of speak and negotiate with the central team. Make sure you go out there and find out what it's like for other schools that have joined as well. Jeff's team supported us as well. We couldn't have done the external due diligence and the legal documentation without them. And I would not recommend anybody to do it on their own.
Sorry, can I just ask, you talked about non-negotiables. Did you have your own set of non-negotiables before you started the process?
Absolutely, yes. So it was things like, the head teacher would obviously still stay in control of their own school. We'd stay in control of our budget. We wanted to keep our own reserves. But, some of this was in the scheme delegation in any way. So, but they were our main questions, when we joined.
And I was just going to highlight, I mean, forgive me if everyone should know this. I mean, as I say, I'm still learning all the time, but from a legal perspective, Jeff, having your non-negotiables set out up front, you don't get that chance again, do you, once you become part of the Multi-Academy Trust? If, for example, you went into a trust and it was almost a takeover, if you've not got your non-negotiables set and agreed, you're not in a good position after, are you?
That's correct, Mark. I mean, the non-negotiables, everyone has non-negotiables, and your non-negotiables, usually in a multi-academy trust, are negotiated and agreed as part of your scheme of delegation. The interesting thing to consider here is that the scheme of delegation can legally be changed 365 times a year. So in reality, you know, the scheme of delegation is your non-negotiable, but it can change. And once the documentation is done, your funding agreement, your commercial transfer agreement, your lease, those are documents that are not changeable. We stopped having changes and applications to change conversion documents years ago. About 5-6 years ago, the DfE stopped having those amendable. So your documentation is what it is. Your non-negotiables in reality are what you negotiate internally, and understand that when you join a multi-academy trust, they will actually protect those non-negotiables, and they won't just take you in the day after conversion. They change your scheme of delegation, and what you've negotiated goes out of the door, because there's nothing you can do at that point, which is why it's important to do your due diligence beforehand. Know who you are joining and know that they will protect your school till they are blue in the face. That's the most important aspect of due diligence. The documentation should just be a final resume of the actual discussions that take place, the conversations, the one-to-ones, the group meetings that take place for months before that. The documentation is just a final resume of all of those things that go on.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all in this for the same reason. We're all trying to protect our the children, the schools, the legacy, etc. But you also, this word due diligence is about things could change in the future where us around the table are not here. It's other people that have not, and if the piece of paper that's signed up to can be is going to be referred to by people that have not agreed it in the first place, because this is going to be a long journey, isn't it? Julie, if we could just nip back to where you were. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine.
The non-negotiables. Okay.
Yeah.
We were at the point where the Chancery Trust, you'd found them.
Yeah.
Was it a match made in heaven? Were you just really lucky to find each other?
Yes, I think we were lucky to find each other, but there are good trusts out there.
Yeah.
I was asked to join the central team in September 2021, and work with a great team of people now who've got children's and staff wellbeing and interests at heart. So my role now is to onboard new schools to the trust, and so I've done 2. Assist with the due diligence on new schools coming in, and I oversee the offices and that they're running efficiently. They can make savings on contract. One thing I'd say to head teachers is the job that is affected the most is the school business manager role. They're learning new software, particularly if you're a maintained school, you're actually learning a whole new job. But the positive thing about being in a trust is you have people there to help and guide you. You're not on your own. I think trust should be delivering through partnership and collaboration so that all children within the trust have an outstanding learning experience. But I also think it's important for trust to have a variety of schools within, as each school has unique qualities that they can bring. And no school should actually feel that they can't look at joining a trust because, for instance, they're RI, they've got no budget. We've just taken on an RI school recently. It was important as a trust to make sure that we had the capacity to do this, and it wasn't at a cost to other schools within the trust as well. But it's sort of our way of giving back a bit to education. And I don't think any trust should consist of all outstanding schools. We've never looked back at becoming an academy and then joining a trust, and we don't feel like we've lost control, and we do feel we've got a voice in shaping the trust for the future. And at the end of the day, it's a 125-year relationship, and you've got to make sure that this is right for both parties.
Yeah. And when you started your I keep calling it sounds like X Factor, doesn't it? The journey.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you started the experience from moving from maintained to multi-academy, did you have checklists for due diligence and stuff like that. And I know you worked with Jeff and his company
Yeah.
for legal advice, etc. But now that you're in the job doing this, I mean, have you got, how many spreadsheets and checklists do you use to help you with this?
Loads. Yeah. I mean, it depends. Let's say maintained schools have different things that we need to look at. For instance, something that we'd not even thought of when we brought in the last maintained school was SIMS licenses.
Yeah.
So we've basically developed a checklist for maintained schools. Now we've got a checklist bringing in academy within the trust, and yeah, we try to go and do it in a day. CEO may go out on a different day, look at teaching and learning and things like that, but we'll go out and look at everything from governance down to budget, down to your staffing structure, down to future projections of pupils and things in one day. And we ask the school then to come and look at the trust on another day. But there's a lot of information there.
Yeah.
And it does take time to go through. And at the end of the day, it's not only the due diligence that you're taking away that day, it is the working partnership, as well. Is that trust? Can you work with those people?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I'm the CEO of your trust and I said to you, Julie, can you bring these 2 schools on, and we need to get this done quickly, you've got your processes mapped out. How long would you sort of like say to the CEO, well, I need so many months? How long would you sort of like predict?
We'd say 6 months.
6 months. Okay.
Yeah. And I definitely wouldn't like to bring in any more than 2 schools in because
Yeah.
of it's not only the before, it's the after, because you've got all the training to do with the new systems and everything. That is another big question. What licenses are you going to have to purchase when you join a new trust? There is a DFE conversion grant out there of 25,000 for maintained schools to come into a trust, but academies will have already had that grant, so they can't apply for it again. So again, budget wise, they've got to look at what can we afford if we've got to buy these licenses and everything else as well, the cost of joining a trust.
Absolutely. Kerry, question for you. With all these conversations floating about around, the minimum benchmark for DFE is 10 schools and the timeframes and stuff like that, and we know you're an outstanding single academy trust, and we know what you from previous conversations. Where are you seeing what your journey is going to look like? Are you going to go 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 8, 10? I mean, you're lucky to have Jeff obviously around that can help with this. But what's your thinking now since the white paper and all these other discussions?
Yeah, for us, we've been sort of for a few years now planning behind the scenes, and we've had lots of conversations that have taken place. We talk about what does due diligence look like for us as a school. And what the white paper did for us was allow us to start to put all this in action. So all the conversations that have taken place, which Jeff has brought to the table, and that's where we've been very lucky, myself as a head teacher, but also the governing board, to have Jeff to sort of keep us abreast of that sort of academy climate and the arena and what's happening along the way or what could happen. So we've been able to be prepared to a certain degree. Regardless of the white paper having, when you showed your chart before, over 1,000 schools a year to convert, I mean, unrealistic is an understatement, really. For us, we feel going from 1 to 2 is going to be the first hurdle and Jeff and I both believe it's harder going from 1 to 2. And within that, you are building a very watertight model. And when we propose the, starting a new multi-academy trust with 2 schools within that, and we are proposing something that is watertight, where due diligence has been done, with a fine tooth comb, and you are presenting that, then it gives you that model for 2 schools to 4 schools, 4 schools to 6 schools, 6 schools. But that journey can't be rushed,
No.
and Julie's, talked really greatly about, the joining the Chancery Trust, then becoming a part of that central team, and then growing from there, and now being in a position where they feel they've got the capacity to take on RI schools. And even from the onset of joining the coffee sessions, if those who have been on before, I've always talked about having capacity and having the right people on board, and having the right people on board and ensuring that these schools are right to work in collaboration with each other is paramount.
Yeah.
And that takes time. And for me, one of the most important things is the people. And you know, the due diligence process that we're up to at the moment, what I'm carrying out is sort of like the soft due diligence, and I'm looking at the schools, you know, schools' websites, schools that have shown interest, schools that we're possibly interested in approaching and having initial conversations. But even before that, we're getting a flavour. We're getting a flavour of the structure, staffing structure already. You get a flavour for the accounts if they're an academy, or a single academy or an empty mat. On the website, you're having a look at teaching and learning, you're having a look at any external reports that they put on there. So you can find a lot first before even walking into a school. But then walking into the school, and I think I've said this a few times before, it's like when you buy your first home, when you're searching for that place to move, and there's this sort of indescribable feeling of walking in saying these people are right for us, this school's right for us. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're not necessarily looking for an equally outstanding school, but we've got to be realistic in the capacity we have. So yes, we're okay with holding our hands up and saying, actually, we are looking for an outstanding to good school, because we don't feel it would be fair to take on an RI school for our first move, or even possibly our second move, even our third move, because that's not fair on that school. Because at the moment, we have to have the right central team built, and that's what we've got to do first. That 1 to 2 schools has got to have everything almost, perfect. In order to be able to move forward. So we're putting a really good case forward, Jeff and I, and strongly believing that 1 to 2 school move is going to be, or should be, accepted.
Definitely, and that's a. I'll come back to you, Jeff, if you don't mind. I'll ask you that question because you've had I'll call it a ding dong with the RSC about because I love that word. Whether the latest information you can update us on, whether, because you asked the question directly to the RSC, your RSC, can we go from 1 to 2? Do you have a problem with that? And what did you get a definitive answer on that?
I did not get a definitive answer. In fact, actually what I got out of that meeting was a 6-hour uncomfortable email conversation about why I was asking such awkward questions. And for me, that's not an awkward question. It's a bog standard, fair question to ask if you're a single academy trust. Kerry's right. We do believe going from 1 to 2 is the biggest journey. Going from 2 to 3 is an easier journey. Going from 9 to 10 is an easier journey than 1 to 2. If you consider all the SATs on the call, we don't have 3 layers of governance. We have 2. We don't have a scheme of delegation because we don't need one. We don't have a top slice because we don't need one. Going from 1 to 2, you have to have all of these infrastructure and cultural changes. And that's a journey. But 2 outstanding SATs, 2 good SATs, two decent SATs, creating something bigger than the sum of the parts. Why would an RSC not go on record and say, yes, I get that. I get what you're doing? Because for me, it ticks the box of a trajectory of up to 10 schools or 7,500 pupils. Bearing in mind, we don't have to be 10 schools by 2030 or 7,500 pupils. We have to be on the trajectory of it. Now, going from 1 to 2 is a trajectory because we're doubling. Going from 4 to 5 isn't doubling. Going from 1 to 2, we're changing culture, we're changing infrastructures and processes and systems. We don't do that from 4 to 5. So we have this blinkered approach that's being brought out by the RSCs, is that a 5-school mat should always be better than a 4-school mat. A 10-school mat is always better than a 9-school mat. It isn't about size. Joking aside, jokingly, size doesn't matter in a multi-academy trust. It just doesn't. No. It's about the skill set to actually run the 2 things that an academy is, which is a place of teaching and learning, and it's a business. And whether you're providing a civic structure to your locality and providing what's right to your stakeholders and being an asset in that locality, in that region, I don't get why we have this furore about, well, why can't an RSC go on record and say, I will back two good or outstanding SATs coming together to create something bigger than the sum of the parts, because that's a journey that actually will be an asset for the region.
Yeah.
But I've never had a satisfactory answer, Mark, from any RSC when I've asked that question, and certainly not mine.
Yeah. Well, we did try to convert when we were on our own, add another, just one more school in that was local to us. We were both good schools, and we were told immediately, no, not looking at two schools going together. And recently I went on to an RSC conference. The big message there was central team has to be ready before they'll even look at you bringing in other schools, which is, again, really difficult. If you're a trust, you know, trying to grow, it's like a chicken and egg thing. You need the money to grow your central team, but you haven't got the money because you haven't got enough schools in. So, I mean, we were fortunate to get trust capacity funding. So that did give us the ability to, you know, sort of secure our jobs and get a central team formed. But not everybody gets that.
No. That's a good question. Good point, Julie. I was going to talk about the TCAF funding, because it's a great idea, but it sort of like runs short very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, we got it from September to March. It covered, and you got to spend that money in that time on specific things.
It's a difficult chat. And when you I truly don't know the answer to this question. So Kerry, Jeff, or Julie, when you're going through due diligence, do you reference anything from the DfE about how to go around due diligence, or is that all being shifted to the schools themselves? Why is everybody laughing?
No, we don't reference the DfE.
No. Guidance and criteria list.
Yeah, no.
It must have been in my inbox somewhere.
I'm good at this, aren't I?
Yeah.
I truly didn't know the answer to that. It was about, okay, so 2030, we want 12,000 schools to become all academies. Okay, here's a checklist. No, it's down to people like yourself, Julie and Kerry, to sort of like make this up as we go along, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There is no book out there to tell you what to do. Obviously, Jeff guided us, you know, which was brilliant. But a lot of the internal due diligence, no, we found out ourselves what we needed to look at and made up our own checklist.
Fantastic. So, I
mean, Mark, so sorry, Mark, the DfE, I've actually pushed the DfE on this and said, why don't you have some kind of guide on what due diligence should look like? Because you should know. And the answer I always get back is due diligence is personal to the school or the entity in reality, because what you and I would say is due diligence, no other person might actually say that. So what they don't want to do, and they're doing it for our benefit, by the way, just don't get me wrong here, they're doing it for our benefit because we need to be told these things, is that they don't want to fit due diligence into a template so people just actually use the template and then miss something that they might want to do themselves. Kind of blows your head, that. So in other words, is they don't want to tell us the way out of something in case we actually use their way out of something, because it might actually drop us back into a problem. Yeah. So in reality, we've got to then find it ourselves. Those head teachers who think due diligence can be done in an afternoon, you and I, Mark, as outsiders, external companies who would support schools and trusts on due diligence, it could take 6 months for us to actually get to a different answer that an afternoon might actually make. So what they don't want to do is actually restrict us with a template. They want us to build a template.
Yeah. Absolutely, and then we could sell it back to them when we've done that. But the thing is,
sell it back to them once we've done that.
We talked about briefly last call, Jeff, about cross-phase maths and how you're seeing in your line of work outside of being a chair of governors that there's going to be there's a strong movement for primaries only maths, and then you see this secondary math. I mean, what's the latest on that you can tell us?
Mark, I've been inundated since the white paper with primaries wanting to set up multi-academic trusts for several reasons. Number one, they don't want to join a cross-phase mat or a mat that's deemed, well, they deem it's led by a secondary school. Lots of primaries are still talking about the phrase feeder primary because it makes primaries sound subservient to the secondary sector. You look at the statistics, there are some very good cross-phase mats and there are some cross-phase mats that don't work well, especially if you've got one secondary and 5 primaries and all of a sudden the secondary goes RI or inadequate. The primaries don't understand what teaching and learning looks like in year 11 So how can they solve that secondaries issues? And this week alone, and bearing in mind it's Tuesday lunch, I've already spoken to 2 secondaries in the same authority who don't wish to talk together about creating the multi-academy trust. What they want is the primaries to go. And the primaries are then saying, well, it's a secondary led, but you don't know what we do for a living, and what does the due diligence look like? How do we due diligence on a secondary, and how does the secondary do due diligence on EYFS if you don't have that understanding? And therefore, how can we create something that's bigger than the sum of the parts if we don't have somebody to gel it and we don't have somebody to join it? Now, cross-phase maths for me, from my experience of doing this for 12 years and converting nearly 300 schools, is that cross-phase maths are not working the way that everyone wanted them to work, which is bridging the gap in that year 7 and actually having a through journey for those children in the same ethos and the same culture. Because it seems a them and us situation still, even in the last 24 hours, I'm still being contacted by primaries saying it's a them and us situation. We need to change that. We need to change that throughout the whole of England.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, so Kerry, if there was a brilliant secondary around the corner, I mean, would you consider that as a primary to be joining, bear in mind what we just talked about?
It's really interesting you asked me that question, because I was on in a different meeting with a secondary senior leader who said, "Oh, yeah, just, I believe you're on your journey to creating a multi-academy trust." And I just said, "Oh, news travels fast." And I said, "Yes, we are." And he said, "Well, I think we might be interested." And then as he left, it posed many questions, and I would be on the fence right now about whether I would join in with a secondary. I think there's many differences between primary and secondary, and that's not just the teaching and learning and understanding the curriculum that runs from early years to A levels. I think there's a lot more behind the scenes that works very differently in secondary and primary schools. And I think that you would have to have a real strong confidence and knowledge about that all before sort of making a step into secondary. If you had to push me for a decision today, I'd stay in a primary math.
Yeah, and I say as a layman, if I was in your position and you would already know the secondary, that was how my mind would work. If you had a secondary in mind, you would already know them because there'd be a relationship, you'd get on well with them, you'd have worked with them, but maybe not want to work with them
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. We're really fortunate, especially in Trafford. We have amazing secondary schools, and we're all close knit really. And people who come to Trafford are very surprised at how close all the schools are, how many secondary schools that you've got pretty much in walking distance, primary schools in walking distance to the feeder school. So we're all quite close knit. So we do know each other very well, and the people that are leading the schools do a good job, but I'd still say no.
Yeah. I've noticed a question from Christine in the chat about special school maths, because that's very topical as well. Julie and Kerry, have you looked at anything around the special schools that could potentially form part of your math or your future or your thinking?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as I said, no school should, not think they can bring something to the trust, and certainly special schools will have a lot they can bring to a trust.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's something that we would look at. And just your conversation there about secondary schools. I mean, I think I've seen locally a secondary school trying to run. There's 2 secondary schools with 2 primary schools, and it's not going well for the primaries because it's been a takeover for the primaries. They've lost their site managers, they've lost their finance staff and everything. But I think primary taking over a secondary, bringing a secondary into the trust, if there was more than one secondary that could possibly support each other, maybe different. I wouldn't recommend a group of primary schools just taking on one secondary, because as Kerry said, we don't know enough about the, sort of year 11, etc. but I don't see if you've got two good secondaries, that may work.
Yeah, and it's about building a team that can manage all aspects of the trust and all phases of the trust, isn't it? You need specialists. You need specialists to be able to manage special schools and primaries and secondaries, don't you? Because you've got to get this right. We're trying to de-risk this whole thing, and having enough expertise to go around is going to be the problem.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think if you've got a well thought through growth plan that considers, if you are thinking about secondary schools, Julie's quite right. You'd need at least 2 secondary schools in there to support each other and to have that common ground of understanding. And also having in your growth plan. I mean, I truly believe that special schools can bring such an invaluable skill set to the maintained schools. So that would be something that we would look at when we've talked about that, having that strongly built central team, having a few schools, and then looking at special schools, but possibly taking in 2 specialist schools when you're up to that confidence point of taking in more, because then again you've got the support network from special school to special schools, then you've got the support network from us who are a well-established MAT with other schools in there, and then I think that collaboration would be extremely strong. But I think it's about balance of the types of schools that you've got in your trust. And like I've said before, we would grow, but certainly when we get to a certain point, you're looking at RI schools, you want to take in more specialist schools. So it's really getting that, and I hate to say it, but it's like a mini local authority that is going to bring something incredible to the schools, because you've got such a diverse skill set coming in from the leaders and from all those schools, from special schools, from just because a school's an RI does not mean that they've got nothing to bring.
No, absolutely.
You can learn so much. I've supported an RI school a few years ago, and I took so much away, and the team was so passionate. And their passion reignited our passion when we're working collaboratively. We joined CPD sessions and the networking. Everything that any school can bring can be really invaluable. But I think your process from your starting point to in your growth plan has got to be right, and it's got to be right for every school.
Well,
sorry, Matt. Coming back to Christine's point there about special schools, in my humble opinion, and we've converted over 40 special schools in this country, and we've created one of, if not the biggest, special school MATs in the country at 14, with a 15th coming in and 2 others joining in the next 12 months as well. Pure special schools. But what I'm seeing is, number one, the DFE have never understood the special needs education sector sufficiently well to understand how to solve the issues and how to incorporate. Right, okay, that's a fair point. That, and local authorities, some are good and some are not so good. Regional schools commissioners, head teacher boards. There are some head teacher boards who do not have a special school head teacher sat on the head teacher board, yet they have 2 Catholic head teachers sat on the head teacher board. And I think that is potentially wrong there, because Catholic schools can only join Catholic MATs. If we don't have a special school head teacher sat on the head teacher board, when an application comes in, how do those people understand what's best for that school? I am now seeing this calendar year a massive trend in special school MATs looking for non-special school hubs to bridge the gap between non-special and special. I'm also seeing an even bigger trend of non-special school hub trusts looking for a special school hub to create one. So in other words, you've got a special school, you've got a PRU, you've got another special school, you've got another PRU, who are then actually come together with the non-special trust to create something bigger than some of the parts. Join up special and non-special education, learn from each other, bring those specialisms, bring those strengths, resolve weaknesses across the board, create something which actually is an asset not only to the trust itself but to the locality, to other trusts, to other schools, to other regions, in actually saying we can franchise this learning out across the country. And what we can do from the ground up is improve understanding of special education and hope it filters back to the decision makers in the DFE.
100%.
I think all schools are finding as well that SEND is becoming massive in every school since COVID in particular. So, you know, they have so much to give to a trust.
Yeah. Julie, I was just about to sort of pick up on a similar point, you know, as a head teacher and naturally thinking about what the children can benefit from any school that's joining the trust, because it's about, you know, making outcomes for children better. It's about giving every children the opportunity to thrive and reach their potential. And for me, it excites me to think that we could have a special school in our trust, because at the moment, to support the children in my school with special educational needs, we try and jump on outreach programs, we try and get specialists in, and the time frame is, you know, is letting children down, if I'm going to be honest. And you know, those children need help and support, and our teachers need expert advice, because we're all specialists in our own right, but we all reach a certain point, don't we, where sometimes children exceed our specialism, and we have to hold our hands up to say we've done all we can. But to have a specialist or a few specialist schools in a trust with you know, mainstream schools would be, I mean, incredible for those children in all of those schools, because equally children in special schools, you know, that may want to integrate and have a day or two in the mainstream, because we were all, you know, some children, for us, we fight for to go to a special school for a couple of days because the facilities that they have are incredible and will meet their needs. And it works both ways, where some children to have the transition into mainstream, and to think, imagine what that would look like in a multi-academy trust, and there wouldn't be any delay. It'd be like, right, let's sort that out, central team make that decision, and those children will benefit from so much more. So it does really excite me. Sorry, I've gone on a bit there and gone a bit passionate about having that.
But that's so good to hear, Kerry, that we could potentially find a solution through what the Academy's movement that the local authorities didn't quite manage to solve. I mean, I'm not saying all of them, but it seemed to me that lots of special schools and PRUs and things like that were breaking away many years ago because they just needed to get on and look after themselves. That's how it felt to me. So this could be a real positive thing that we're talking about.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of maintained school looks, well, they think about becoming part of a trust as a negative and losing everything. But I think sometimes we've got to change our mindset. I mean, like today, all the positives that have come out of joining a trust.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if we can get the message out there, we can make a real difference for all these children.
So with that in mind, Julie, I mean, X factor again, from not being able to have your own classroom with windows, you academised, you are where you are now, where your job is onboarding and performing due diligence. You seem to be in a really good place in terms of how the Chancery Trust is and how it's worked out. Is anything else to say about it? You wouldn't look back, right?
No, I definitely wouldn't look back. No, becoming part of the trust is the best thing we've ever done. Sort of for the teachers and other members of staff, the career progression that they've got now, you won't get that in a single school. So that we share sort of resources, sort of like sports teachers, things like that, you know, we'll sort of pay for half a day each. And, you know, there's so many different things you could do. We've put on CPD. We've recently put on a Brill Kids Fest, which was a conference for children, which was about being brilliant and being the best you can be. And it was all for the well-being of the children. And they had goodie bags, they had T-shirts, lanyards, the lunch out and everything. And we couldn't have done that on our own. But as being a part of a trust, there is so much more you can do, and you're in control of doing it.
No, it's
exciting just listening to that.
It is exciting. It is. It is so exciting, Kerry. And as I say, you know, there is so much more you can do, but you're in control of what you're doing. And all of our schools get a say in what we're doing. The head teachers all meet up, the business manager meet up, site managers all meet up. You know, so everybody's working as a team. And no, it's a great feeling.
Brilliant. And Kerry, from where you are now to 2030, what do you think it's going to look like in a few years' time? I think, are you still there, Kerry?
Oh no, I keep on freezing.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm up in the hills.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I've got this far, if I'm going to be honest.
Doing well. Did you hear what I said?
I didn't, sorry.
I was just going to say, with your, obviously you're on your trajectory to the growing your trust. How do you think you're going to look like in 4 or 5 years?
I'd love to have 5 schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. That sounds good to me. Jeff.
5 years, 5 schools.
That sounds good to me. Jeff, what would you leave us with some final thoughts on where we are now, like since the dust has settled on the white paper and stuff like that?
I think, Mark, that if you look back at the last white paper of Nicky Morgan took abuse and death threats on social media, saying that all schools will be in a MAT. Nadeem Zahawi said all schools will be in a MAT. He's not taken any of that. In fact, actually, some people are tipping in to take over BJ's job. So in reality, what I think it shows is we're at a point in time where we accept we are where we are and we want to do it right, and we're stopping fighting. We're looking ahead. We're not looking insular. We're not just circling the wagons. We're looking ahead. But due diligence now has to take front and centre, and it's possible that those SATs on the call will be doing due diligence at some point if they decide to join a MAT rather than create a MAT and grow themselves. It's possible that the SATs on the call will be doing due diligence on much younger trusts who might not necessarily have the experience you have of being an academy and doing things well. Therefore, due diligence isn't just what it looks like, it's what it feels like. You can actually put your head into the due diligence to think, well, what does that look like? What does this tick a box? Have we got the same ethos? Because if I ask all 22,000 schools in England, what's your ethos? Every one of the schools will say the same thing, which means we're all the same, and we're not. It's how you live that. But how does it feel, that due diligence? What does it feel to you if you're a 12-year SAT joining a 1-year MAT because that's the decision that's being taken for you? Or that's the decision that you think is right for yourself. So never underestimate the amount of work. Don't always think that due diligence is a template, it's a set activity. It isn't. Due diligence is absolutely anything and everything that you decide. And it isn't just about what it looks like, it's about what it feels like. And if you feel that you can create your own multi-academy trust, then go for it. Yeah. Have the excitement of going for it, because you've always got the safety net at some future point of joining a multi-academy trust, potentially as a hub, if you can't grow your own. It's an exciting journey. My advice will be, consider all of your options, take a look at who you are, use external companies to actually verify and triangulate who you are and what you're capable of. Look at upscaling and upskilling your processes, your systems, your mindset, your infrastructure, and then actually consider all of the options open to you. Because it's fallen on our generation to make decisions for generations to come. And that's where we are today. But that's what we do. Both the strategic or operational entities, our job is to make those decisions that leave a legacy. We talk about legacy, we talk about leaving the place better than we found it. And everything, even today, has been due diligence for everyone on the call.
Absolutely. And you're not alone, right? There's partners, there's companies like School Business Services and J&G Marshall that are here to help and do things and take some of the load from people like Kerry, Julie, and everyone else on the call to say, let us look after that. Let us look after the financial planning. We can do that. Let's look after the legals, the soft due diligence that we talk about, the people. We can't help with that, really, guys. That's what you can do, and understanding the ethos and your non-negotiables, etc. But it really is a journey that's going to be. There's no end point. The starting point has already happened. We're on our way. It's a positive thing, and it's really exciting to me that we've got a lot of people on this call that are seeing, okay, well, I'm not on my own now. You've seen Julie's story. That's a fantastic, for me, that just sums up where we are, that we can do this, we can do it well, but it's a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of time, and we're creating jobs to do this specifically. They're not being funded correctly at the moment, which is a shame, but we're doing it right in certain areas, and we can show and we can listen and we can learn.
Mark, that that is so correct. Absolutely everything you said there is so correct. And it's important that what schools and trusts do is conduct their own internal due diligence, use external partners like SBS, like us, to actually then do external due diligence. And then you overlay the two findings, the two reports on each other, because it either corroborates and verifies and triangulates what you think, and therefore it gives you a better understanding of things, and better understandings lead to better decision making, and better decision making leads to better outcomes for the children. Or what it does is it says that actually there's a discrepancy in internal and external due diligence, and that creates a conversation as to why, and that is absolutely beneficial as well. So it's a win-win using internal with external due diligence, because SBS has been doing this for decades. You know, my company's been doing it for a long time. And why wouldn't you use horses for courses? Why wouldn't you use internal as well as external to make a better decision for children's outcomes?
Definitely. I was just going to leave one more point from me, is that due diligence is not about everything being good. It's about sharing information and actually de-risking the situations and mitigating it. As Kerry and Julie have said, not everything's going to be perfect. Not everything's going to be perfect, but as long as you know and you can discuss it and actually agree on a sensible solution going forward, that's all we can ask for.
Yeah. I think have a positive mindset towards risk as well.
Yeah.
I think if you go into this shying away from risk, because there's always going to be a risk, but I think a positive mindset towards that, and having the right people, you know, to ensure that those risks can be overcome, whatever they may be, whether it's in the financial, the governance, the teaching and learning, then, and you've got a plan of action, then that's the main thing. So I'd say to people not to shy away too much, because there's always going to be a risk involved, but you've got to just be knowledgeable about that. And I think the important part is that schools shouldn't do this on their own. They should have people like yourselves coming on board and looking at those areas, because things will be missed if you try and do it on your own. I think you need different sets of eyes looking at different things, coming from a different angle, because you can't go into this with any surprises. You don't want to have the risks being presented to you when you're already in it and it's too late. You need to mitigate those before.
Absolutely. And Julie, have you got any final thoughts you want to share with us?
No, I just think, you know, make sure you talk to the trust if you're thinking of joining one, or, you know, the partners that you're going to be working with. As I say, we did a try before we bought, and we sort of worked together beforehand. It's like you know, going into a marriage, isn't it, really? You know, you don't just meet up a couple of times and go, yeah, go on, then we'll get married, you know. So yeah, definitely do a try before you buy.
I'd have to check what the I know platinum is 70, everyone knows that, but I don't know what 125 years is of marriage. what that must be. I'm sorry, we've not got too many questions. We've answered a few along the way, guys. Bex, is there any questions that we need to answer before we sign off?
I don't think so. Jeff and Julie have been responding to questions as we've gone through, but we will be sending out the recording. If anybody's got any questions that they either didn't want to ask on the chat today and they just want to come back to us separately, we can pick those up after today's session.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you to Jeff, Julie and Kerry and Becky for being wonderful again. And we will be in contact. This is the 4th of 6. So number 5 will be scheduled and we'll be communicating that. If you need anything from any of us on the call, just drop us a line. Becky will be sharing the information very shortly. So thank you very much, people. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.